Good afternoon and welcome to this Population Research UK webinar to launch our open funding opportunity to support policy exchange. My name's Andy Crawford. I lead on the operational side for Population Research UK, and we'll abbreviate that to PRUK throughout this webinar. We'll have 3 short presentations from members of the PRUK team providing an overview of PRUK, then moving on to the specifics of what we're looking for from this funding opportunity and then how to apply. And then this will be followed by an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you might have. This is a webinar format, so you'll be aware that as an attendee, your video and microphones are off. And so if you do have any questions, please type them in using the Q&A function. If you use this function, then the questions should be visible for others to see, and then they can upvote the questions that are most relevant to them to make sure that we ensure that we get around to answering that question at the end of this webinar. The chat function is also live, so if you use that, we'll keep an eye on that, but then others won't have the opportunity to upvote your question. So as I say, we'll have 3 presentations, so please submit your questions throughout those presentations, and then we'll work through them all at the end. After the webinar, we'll provide written answers to all of the questions that have been posted, even the ones that we don't get a chance to answering on the webinar. We're recording this webinar and that'll be hosted on our YouTube channel, and the slides will be shared and hosted on Zenodo. And links to all those resources, so the YouTube channel and the Zenodo, our community on Zenodo, will be added to the call text as links. So it should be easy for you to find. I do encourage you to actually visit our Zenodo page and search for Population Research UK community, and that's where you'll be able to see outputs from our work to date. So that includes our consultation report from our consultation workshops we ran towards the end of 2024, our delivery plan that we published last year, addressing those the needs that we heard from our consultation period, and then outputs from the workshops that we've run to date. So that's all I wanted to say on housekeeping. So I can hand you over to our first speaker and presentation, who's Nick, who's going to tell you a bit more about Population Research UK. Thanks. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everybody. We're delighted to invite you all, to host you all on this webinar this afternoon, which is talking about this exciting opportunity to apply for the ability to enhance policy impact across longitudinal population studies. So my name's Nick Timpson. I work down in the southwest of the UK in Bristol, and I'm lucky enough to be the co-director, or one of 2 co-directors of Population Research UK, along with Alyssa Goodman, who you'll meet shortly. It's my job just to introduce you to Population Research UK very briefly before we move over to describe some of the specifics of this call and the processes that go with it. So without further ado, I'll just step into that. Population Research UK. It's an institution really at heart with aims to enhance infrastructure in and around longitudinal population studies within the UK. The objective here isn't to build things that are new, but is to address gaps in that infrastructure, really optimizing on what longitudinal population studies can bring in a research capacity, but then also moving beyond that and providing well-placed evidence to support policy and needs at a population level. So it's leveraging existing infrastructure and making the most from it. From an initial UKRI infrastructure investment of around £10 million, approximately 6 million of that will be allocated to 6 major activities, and I'll talk through those in brief in a moment. And we have the opportunity to allocate a little under £2 million to the support of innovative and collaboration supporting objectives, which we'll be launching later in this year. Really importantly for us is the ethos of the work that we do in trying to build and support infrastructure for longitudinal studies, which is that it's driven by community consultation. So we listen, we try and formulate ideas around what's required, and then in that context, we're able to provide support for the development, or if you like, the bridging of gaps within the infrastructure landscape that's in front of us. So that's PRUK in a nutshell, and Anna, if you can advance the slide, that'd be great. So where does that start? So after a period of very early consultation, we formulated a delivery plan, which was set up in and around our core objectives as Population Research UK. And there are 5 of those. So they sit across the coordination and advocacy for longitudinal population studies, the enhancement of the ability to discover those studies and the assets that they contain, an effort to streamline data access once those longitudinal population study assets have been discovered. So thinking about how those studies and their data and their samples can be accessed. An objective to facilitate linkage, so the connection of those studies through to administrative records, and then importantly, a really exciting opportunity to build on those and to build capacity around those studies through skills via training. So they're the core objectives. Now, importantly, we've been able to map those objectives to the activities, as I mentioned at the top. So there are 6 core activities that we're supporting as PRUK. And you can see those listed on the left-hand side there, mapped across the objectives that I just mentioned. They sit across community engagement, policy, as we'll be discussing today, a searchable register for UK LPS, the simplification and enabling of LPS infrastructure. So the idea there being the capacity to provide routes through from discovery to access of those assets. And then 2 which are focused on training and the generation of capacity through the construction of a secure data environment for training purposes, and then provision of content for those. Now, each of those has alongside its specific aims and timelines, and bear in mind that these slides will be available to you to spend more time on, but it's important to have this context in mind for today, because we're interested in not just each of those specific activities, but their interplay, so the synergy that can be achieved between them. So, for example, we'll be focusing on policy today, but of course, there's a natural synergy there with the community engagement and advocacy piece in activity 1, which provides more value for money across the whole effort of Population Research UK. So the aims and objectives then are aligned to those specific activities, and they're set out across the period of support through PRUK, which goes out to the back end of 2028. So just one more click, please, Anna. We're focusing on the policy activity today, and there'll be far more details of that, but this was born of our early consultation, and then through the process of designing our delivery plan. And if we just go one further, Anna. We haven't stopped since those early consultation and delivery plan formation. Our ongoing opportunities for consultation have gone on to flag additional areas or exciting ideas that are then relevant for the development of our policy-facing activity, as we're going to discuss today. And some of those additional ideas include the notion of an evidence marketplace, or this important initiative to foster an atmosphere of queries, i.e. stakeholders with assets in dialogue with those with evidence requirements and questions being able to move back and forth. So really focusing in on the notion of bidirectional stakeholder engagement and conversation. The notion that actually getting in early and being part of the prospective planning processes for longitudinal population studies is an important zone for stakeholders in trying to think about the agility of those resources to address policy need. Thinking about the effectiveness of networks that can sit across those communities and talk freely and communicate about needs and assets that are available. But critically, 2 at the bottom there, which are important aspects to just dwell on, the provision of practical solutions which can enable change and allow impact to be developed is a key area and key message that we keep hearing coming through, alongside the importance of evaluation and being able to show that these things really make a difference. So hopefully in the round, I've told you a little bit about PRUK, our objectives, how the activities that we're supporting are aligned to those, and then also then how through a process of early consultation and maturation of that consultation and the messages that we hear, we've been able to bring together the core that we're going to describe today. So with that, I'll stop the overview and I'll hand over to Alyssa, who'll tell you a bit more about the core.
Thanks, Nick. So my name is Alyssa Goodman, and good afternoon, everyone. Alongside Nick, I'm a co-director of Population Research UK, and I will step you through in more detail the call that we've issued today. So Nick's described the main objectives of PRUK and how the policy exchange activity fits with the bigger picture. The bigger picture here is about making the most of longitudinal population studies data and evidence, and really leveraging the value of the longitudinal population study sector, making sure that it's fully felt in policy making and that its evidence is well used in important policy areas. So in terms of the key activities that this project will undertake at a high level, the impact activities are based around connecting policy stakeholders with evidence needs to LPS resources and researchers. So the project holders will be expected to map and engage with key policy stakeholders, engage with longitudinal population study teams and expert analysts and researchers working with study data, provide evidence synthesis and or data analysis. And Nick mentioned at the end there evaluation, so implementing methods and metrics for the assessment of the impact of the work. So going through the major areas of the call in more detail and starting with the aim and scope. So the call aims to support the development of innovative policy engagement mechanisms focused on 2 or more areas of policy need. So the primary aim is to facilitate the generation of impact from longitudinal population studies research. And the secondary aim is to identify how the delivery mechanism that's proposed can be scaled to other policy areas, other policy audiences, or to draw on the evidence base using more of the longitudinal population studies resource that we have in the UK. So the successful team should be based in the UK and engage primarily with UK policy stakeholders and should focus on the translation of research into policy from multiple disciplines. And the work should draw on the assets of as broad a range of longitudinal population studies from the UK as possible, rather than, for example, drawing on a single study or a narrow set of studies. So moving next to the policy areas, the proposals should demonstrate their central relevance and potential for impact in reference to major policy initiatives, for example, relating to UK government missions or other clearly articulated strategies and policy agendas, be that in the devolved nations or local priorities, or with reference to UKRI and major funder impact strategies. So we are funded jointly by the ESRC and the MRC, and proposals that generate impact in relation to both social and economic policies and health policies, or in some way address the interrelationship between health, economy and society, are especially welcomed. So the proposals will need to specify the areas of policy in which they'll engage and how they will demonstrably improve policy engagement and impact in those areas. So into the next section of the call that I'll turn to is connecting stakeholders. Your proposal will need to describe how you'll work with relevant stakeholders in the policy community. And equally, proposals will need to describe how the work will engage with academic experts and longitudinal population studies teams in order to connect evidence needs and questions and to generate answers to those questions. So applicants should describe how they'll engage with existing data infrastructure services to maximise learning and not to duplicate existing work. So in terms of the resourcing, academic domain expertise relevant to the specific policy needs that are identified in your proposal are essential. The team should have strong networks and relationships across policy stakeholders, including the government analytical community, and experience and capability to deliver policy impact from research by designing and scaling effective policy engagement mechanisms. The project should have the ability to either generate or commission novel research analysis or evidence synthesis to fill evidence gaps, and to, as I said already at the outset, to implement methods and metrics for the assessment of the impact generated. So I'll now hand over to Andy Crawford, who'll talk more about the application process and operational support.
Excellent. Thanks, Alyssa. So as I mentioned at the start of this webinar, my name's Andy Crawford and I lead on the operational side for Population Research UK, and I joined the team in 2024. Previous to that, I was a programme manager at the Medical Research Council for 5 years, where I was involved in multiple funding opportunities, both with MRC but also across UKRI and other charity funders. So as you've heard, sort of PIUK is funded by the UKRI Infrastructure Fund, and it's managed by ESRC and MRC. And part of that funding is to support the hub team, but most of that funding is what's called a UKRI Flexible Funding Pot. And this is a mechanism that UKRI use to award funds to a network or research hub to allow them to contract further research projects or activities. The delivery plan that we published in June last year describes the 6 activities we'll be supporting and how we'll be delivering them. And as you've heard, this is activity 2 from that plan in this open call. We've aligned the call text and the assessment processes on the standard UKRI processes, and so that format should be familiar to many of you. And so standard UKRI eligibility criteria apply. Proposals are invited from eligible UK-based organisations in accordance to standard UKRI practice. So before applying, please do check your eligibility status, both at the organisation level and also as an individual level. So I'll talk through some of the sections of the application form that you'll be needing to complete. So the vision, so what are you hoping to achieve with your proposed work? So here, if you can explain how your proposed work will advance current practice, how it prevents an advantage over the current practice, and how it's novel. And it's important to address the need articulated in the funding call, especially in the what we're looking for section that Alyssa just highlighted. The rationale, so what evidence that the proposed work is likely to be successful. And so here you can explain how it builds, your proposed work will build on the evidence that approach is feasible, how it builds on relevant experience of using LPS data to address policy questions, and how it builds on evidence of user demand. The next section is the approach to how are you going to deliver the proposed work. So it's here where you should detail the methods, objectives, tasks, milestones for the project, and make the case that they're realistic and achievable. You should provide details of how the work will be managed, including any decisions, or how any decisions will be made and how progress is going to be monitored. And you can provide a project plan, including milestones and timelines in the form of a Gantt chart or similar, and this should be included as a 1-page annex at the end of your application. In this section, you should also demonstrate how the resources you anticipate needing are comprehensive, appropriate, and justified, and how it represents optimal use of the resources to achieve your intended outputs and outcomes. And you should also include a data management plan, which clearly details how you comply with UKRI published data management and sharing policies. And again, this should be, your data management plan should be included as an annex at the end of your application. In the applicant and team capability to deliver, here's why are you the right individual and team to successfully deliver the proposed work. So you should use the resume for research and innovation format. And again, this is attached as an annex to provide evidence of how the team have the relevant experience appropriate to your career stage to deliver the proposed work, how you have the right balance of skills and expertise, the right appropriate leadership and management skills, and how you've contributed to developing a positive research environment and wider community. In the application form, there's space, and this is where you should sort of demonstrate how the team resources you anticipate needing for this proposed work are comprehensive, appropriate, and justified. And this is where you provide the FTE, full-time equivalent of all the staff roles that you're requesting funding for. You should also include details on how that represents optimal use of the resources to achieve your outcomes to maximise the potential of the impact of this work. You should also include details of any project partners here, and then project partner statements of support should be included as an annex. And if your application involves an industry partner, this is where you should include the industry collaboration framework letter as an annex as well. And then the final section is for scalability, sustainability, and data sharing. So how will your proposed work be sustained beyond the life of funding to meet the goals? And this is where you should explain how your proposed work will deliver sustained policy impact, engagement mechanisms, and partnerships which continue to use LPS research to address policy needs. How your proposed work will be sustained beyond the life of the funding to meet its ultimate aims. How it will be scaled to meet the needs of other policy issues, policy audiences, and the LPS community, including how outputs, learning, and policy engagement mechanisms will be managed and shared with the PIUK Hub team so it can be accessed across the LPS community. So those are all the sections of the application that you need to complete. So that if we then move on to the costings, you should provide a full breakdown on the full economic cost of your activity under standard fund headings. So this includes providing a breakdown of other directly incurred and other directly allocated costs in the tables provided in the draft application form that you'll see a link to from our call text. The sections that I've just gone through on the previous slides, those are headings on the applications, and so there's a maximum page limit of 8 pages for the application form, plus any of the permitted annexes if they are relevant to your application. And here you can see a list of the permitted annexes and the page lengths for each of those annexes. If you're unsure about anything, please do get in touch with the Hub team ahead of submission, because after submission, your application can't be changed and applications are not going to be returned for amendment. And so if your application does not follow the guidance, there's a chance it may be rejected. So please do get in touch with any queries you have ahead of submission. And then from there, move on to how to apply. So this is probably the biggest difference between this funding opportunity that we're running and a funding opportunity run directly by UKRI. For UKRI calls, you'll be using the funding service. We don't have access to that, and so to apply to this funding opportunity, you'll complete sections of the application form in Word, up to 8 pages long. You'll add any of the permitted annexes relevant to your application, adhering to those specific page limits, convert it to a PDF document, and then email it as an attachment to the PRUK Hub team at info@pruk.ac.uk, and a member of the team will confirm receipt of your application. We then move on to the assessment process. So this funding opportunity is aligned to UKRI principles of assessment and decision making. Following close of a funding opportunity, all submitted applications will be examined by the PRUK Hub team to ensure meets the standard eligibility criteria and it's within scope of the funding opportunity. Your application will then be reviewed by an expert panel, and this panel will be comprised of individuals with expertise in realising policy impact from longitudinal population studies and non-conflicted members of the PRUK leadership group. So there'll be 2 panel members, or at least 2 panel members, that will be assigned to your application, and your application will be reviewed against the assessment criteria listed in the call text. These assessment criteria align to the sections of the applications that I've just gone through, and that's standard practice for UKRI. Again, I want to draw attention to the core text in the for what we're looking for section of the core text, and it's important that you read this to ensure that what you're proposing is aligned to this vision. If what you're proposing to do is sensible and feasible but not aligned to this vision, then it's not going to score highly. It's unlikely the panel will recommend it for funding. All the applications are scored, and then at the end of the panel meeting, applications will be ranked, and the panel will make a funding recommendation, which will then require endorsement from ESRC and MRC, and we anticipate making a single award. So if we just move on to my final slide, so just a summary of the key bits of information. So you can apply for up to just over £900,000 as full economic cost, and PRUK will fund 80% of the full economic cost. In the core text, there's details that includes where you can include details on permitted exceptions funded at 100% FEC, and those costs are permitted, but the request to PRUK cannot exceed £725,000. The start date of this proposed work should be no later than the 1st of October, and we anticipate issuing an award letter by the end of June this year. The duration of the award is 24 months. And the project must end by the end of 2028, which is the same for all work that PRUK will be doing. The call is open now, and it will close at 4 p.m. on the 1st of April. And we aim to inform candidates of a funding decision within about 10 weeks of the call closing, so it'll be around mid to late June that we'll be informing applicants. And as I mentioned before, if you have any questions at any stage, please do email the Hub team on the email address info@pruk.ac.uk. So thank you very much. This brings an end, I think, to the presentation section of the webinar.